Michaela, in 1997, at the age of 24, you had a near-death experience. Can you tell me how did that come about? Well, it was in March of 97, after a failed attempt to commit suicide. The reason for that lies in a long story. It actually goes back to the time when I was in a state of psychological crisis at the age of 16, from which I simply could not free myself. The cause was my first relationship with a young man at that time, which could primarily be characterized by violence and humiliation. We had been together for a couple of years, and after 3 years, I freed myself from him, but my self-esteem and my self-respect were almost lost. For a long time, I was incapable of developing relationships, and although I tried again and again to find a new partner, I thought, however, I did find a new partner for a perfectly suitable relationship, and this was in 1997 when I first met him. But he was someone who traveled a lot, so we could not see each other frequently. Therefore, we tended to go on holiday together in order to get to know one another better. There were still many other people there, and it quickly became evident that it was a joint holiday which erupted into a confrontation. Unfortunately, with all the humiliations, it became clear to me that I couldn't stay there any longer and that I had to leave. We argued intensively, so I realized that there was no sense in this, and I considered the fact that this had already happened on the second or third day of our holiday, so I set to pack my bag and travel back home. We took this vacation in the south of France, and I was hoping that when I started leaving, he would bring me to the station, as there were quite a number of vehicles available, but I myself was too proud to ask for help from him. But it seemed clear to me that when I started to walk up the road, that he would follow me and ask that if he couldn't bring me to the station, because it was, in fact, quite far away. Well, he didn't follow me, so I started walking, and I then hitchhiked. The first car that stopped was fatal. It was a big mistake, because I got into the car of the wrong person, and so I stayed in a small French place for one day and one night, and I was on the way home the next day until I finally arrived home. Well, this travel was sheer agony for me, with a long line of catastrophes which were awaiting me. I felt hunted, regarded as fair game. I felt rushed and restless, and I was really quite scared because I jumped out of the moving car, thereby injuring myself. And under these circumstances, I was on my way home. During the journey home, I had enough time to reflect about these things. For example, when I was waiting for the next train at the station, I couldn't stop thinking, and then I said to myself that I could no longer bear this situation, and that for the mere reason that I'm here on Earth, I'm constantly exposed to the misuse by others. What I mean is that somebody comes up to me, taking from me what suits him at that particular moment. Yet I wasn't able to cope with the evil experience during the years before, and I simply could no longer bear my fears that possibly there would still be more obstacles pulling me down into the abyss. And then I was simply wondering, how can I ensure that something like this will never happen again? And I realized that the only solution for me was simply not to exist anymore. In consequence of this decision, I went to many pharmacies on the way home and bought the strongest sleeping pills I could obtain without a prescription. I bought about 5 packages in total. One package contained about 20 tablets, thus in total 100 tablets, and each package of tablets had a different dosage strength. So I put them all into a bowl in order to make them easier to swallow, and I extracted the tablets from the little blister pack, and I put all the tablets into this bowl, and in the end there were 100 tablets in the bowl, and I got some alcoholic beverages, to drink, and I finally started taking these tablets. But I quickly realized that swallowing too many tablets at once wasn't easy. So after the fifth or sixth tablet, the remaining ones began to block in my throat. I was well aware of the fact that I had taken enough pills to get sick, but not enough to not wake up again. So I started to pour water and alcohol into the bowl and to mix all this into a sort of paste, and I drank as much of it as possible, and which was in fact quite a goodly quantity. And there wasn't much left in the bowl. So then I lay down on the couch. The television was running, and so I waited for things to happen. But I was wrong in assuming that you just simply fall asleep. This was not at all the case. On the contrary, I suddenly grew extremely restless, and it felt to me as if my whole body was starting to tremble, and my legs as well. I lost control over my body, and for quite a while I was genuinely frightened about what would happen next. So I said to myself, just let it be over quickly. And at one moment, all of a sudden, it was over. And I found myself in the midst of an extremely bright light in which I was moving around wondering where the brightness came from and why everything was so bright. Then I was looking around, marveling at what I saw and realizing that I didn't feel my steps when I was walking, and that I couldn't even feel myself walking, and that I actually could no longer feel my whole body. Because you always can feel pain in any place in the body. We might have a little itch or something like that, but everything was gone. Neither was it too warm, nor was it too cold. Everything was perfect. I had no more fear now. There was nothing for me to worry about, and all problems were forgotten. Exactly as one would like, and even more beautiful. So I just enjoyed all this, and I continued moving around here and there, and being fascinated by this light and this incredible feeling of well-being that I had never experienced before. And after some time spent moving around, I saw a black spot sort of far away from me. So I said to myself, ooh, there's something going on there. So I moved in the direction of this black spot. And as I came closer and closer, I saw there was a table and that a person with folded arms was sitting at this table without moving a muscle and waiting for me. I also noticed that this person was looking at me, watching me approach. So I continued walking there, and getting closer, I recognized this person to be my grandfather, who had already been dead for 7 years at this particular time. Before his death, my grandfather was in hospital, and I knew that he had been seriously ill. I couldn't deal well with the problems at that time. My mother always asked me to visit my grandfather at the hospital. But as rebellious and selfish teenager as I was, I just replied, "Sure, I can do that when I have enough time." I did not visit him because he had died before I had had the time to visit him. And it was so incredible to see him again now. Seeing him again, and I thought, now he's here, so I can repair the evil I have done by not visiting him, and now I can embrace him. I was so delighted about that, and I wanted to approach him. I had already opened my arms, saying, "Grandpa," and I just wanted to embrace him. But he did not stand up, and when he saw me approaching him, he kept me from doing so, just saying, "What are you doing here?" He said so in a tone of voice, which in my whole life I have never heard before. Because he said it in a rejecting and reserved tone of voice, seeking to demonstrate his acrimony and anger. So I became shocked, and I didn't understand the meaning of his question. "What are you doing here?" So I just looked around, but I couldn't give him an answer. And when he said, "Sit down," he was standing on the side on which I was standing, because I was not allowed to change to his side. And then there was suddenly a chair, which I'm sure was not there before. This chair was positioned in such a way that I just had to sit down. So I sat down on the chair. and I just waited. Then my grandfather said, "You have to go back in order to make a fresh start." He said this to me in a very firm tone of voice, which I cannot describe to you, but this was really a must for me. I first thought that I couldn't believe my ears and that he cannot send me back, because I was so happy to be here now, and that finally it was my desire to depart from this life. So I intended to explain it to him, and I said to him, "Grandpa, I can't go on any longer. I'm fed up with life." And I wanted to explain to him the reasons for my decision. But he did not allow me to do so, because he was not the least bit interested in that, and he was certainly not impressed by this, and therefore he immediately repeated what he said before, even in a more decisive tone of voice. "You go back now in order to start from scratch again." And then it was all over. And I don't know how it was that I came back, because I just awoke and found myself lying on the couch at home. You know, you open your eyes, you recognize your sitting room, but I heard an unpleasant noise, like wailing voices and wheezing sounds. One could compare it with snorting animals. First I was frightened about that, and I asked myself, "My God, what's that?" Then I had very quickly heard some wise words. I'm not a member of the church, you know, neither am I a believer in the usual sense of the word, but I heard my own voice without having said anything. But these wise words penetrated me deeply into my consciousness. God gives us our lives, and God takes away our lives. Then I thought, oh my God, now I have really messed it up. Already before I had made a mess of things, and what I just did was particularly bad, and subsequently I was really afraid of recalling a time from which I'm still feeling the repercussions. In this moment, I realized that it was only my head which I could move correctly. I also could open my eyes, and I tried to stand up, but I couldn't. Moreover, I felt a bit lost concerning the perception of space and time and other things, comparable to a sleep-wake cycle, when cycles come and go all of the time. And at some point of time, I might have dropped off and woke up again. Then I eventually noticed that I was able to drop my right arm down. It had fallen down the couch, which made me happy, and at some further point, I woke up again. And subsequently I was falling asleep and waking up and falling asleep. Then I had to go to the toilet because I felt strong pressure on my bladder. So I tried to stand up, but I couldn't. However, what I was able to do was to roll myself down from the couch, and in doing so I fell onto the ground, and then I crawled to the toilet, but I was almost unable to move. I tried to speak, but I realized that the only thing that I was able to do was groaning, and regardless of my groaning, I still tried to speak, but I couldn't. There were only strange and monstrous sounds coming out of my mouth. And finally, I reached the toilet, but climbing onto it was another feat of strength. Finally, I was happy to be sitting on the toilet, but there was nothing more. I could not pass any urine, despite the pressure on my bladder. You know, I couldn't believe it, and the general state described before went on for quite some time. I was also hallucinating and quite well aware of all this, because I was aware of my body. I was again feeling pain, sadness, fear, and all these perceptions were present again and simply bowled me over. And in this way I realized that my suicide attempt had failed. Yet another question kept arising. What will happen next? Which problems will further be added to the ones which were the cause of my suicide attempt? What influence did this experience have on your future life? Well, first, there were no consequences at all, because at first I had so many problems, primarily physical problems. And I didn't even know if I would suffer disabilities. And what I mean is if any sensory organs would cease to function. Still another issue was that I had written a suicide note before, and now I didn't know if it had already been received. I had done this in order to put pressure on myself, so I had established contact. In the suicide note, I tried to explain the reasons. I also had contacted my parents in this way. Therefore, I had to explain the whole story now, the reasons why I wanted to die, and that the suicide attempt had failed, that I was afraid of not being able to escape these unpleasant circumstances in order to cope with my problems. So I had to put myself out because I could not handle it on my own. Nevertheless, it took me quite some time, I would say about 2 years, to begin the appropriate therapy under external pressure. I have received psychotherapy for 5 years in the form of psychoanalysis, where the suicide aspects were treated. And this worked perfectly well. I've had wonderful therapists, and at some point we touched on the issue of what happened in connection with my suicide attempt. I knew exactly that I was not hallucinating. It is clear also that I was not hallucinating, but this was different from the experience I had before. Well, the therapist listened to it and said, "It's obvious that you were hallucinating because you had swallowed so many tablets." At first, I was really disappointed, but then I thought he would know better because, in the end, he was an expert. And now I had to be aware that my experience was only a figment of my imagination, and that I had to forget this issue. And as a matter of fact, I ignored it for many, many years. It was only last year, which was exactly 20 years ago, when I happened to see the film of Gabi Koster. A cold would have been enough. I knew that she had suffered a stroke. However, I did not know that she had had a near-death experience. So I had seen this film, and when the scene with meeting with her father followed, well, she has seen a field of flowers, and what I saw was nothing else but brightness. And her father asked her the same question as my grandfather about what was she doing there. Her experience was like mine. Also, when she was asking herself, "What's going on here?" then I thought that this is certainly no coincidence, and that I won't be talked into it any longer, that everything is a figment of my imagination. So subsequently, I started to process my experience. I have provided the relevant literature, familiarizing myself with this unusual topic, and someday, about a half year later, I stumbled across your channel, and then I knew that I was again willing to deal with this issue, allowing myself to concentrate on it again, because repressing it was not so good for me. It has hardened my heart. From the time on when dealing with this tragic topic again, and when being aware of my feelings and standing by them, and also when talking about it, my heart is completely softened. What I mean is that I don't have to oppose myself so much, because this experience is a part of yourself. It's not something you can simply repress. It's a part of yourself. It does not flee away. It is something that you always carry with you. And that is what I became aware of in everyday life. It was just that I tried to get around on my own. Sometimes when I was outside, my grandfather, I think of him very often, and when I do so, I'm quite happy that he has sent me back and didn't allow me to go to him, to embrace him. Nevertheless, I'm sure that he would have wanted me to do so. But he also knew as well as I did that this would not be good. Well, I'm riding a motorcycle, and when I'm outside riding through the prettiest roads, I experience deep inner joy. Then I'm shouting out my joy, thanking my grandfather. "Thank you, Grandpa. This was a great thing." And I'm sure that when the day comes, I will get there once again. It will be different than before, because then he will embrace me, and I'm sure he will say, "I am proud of you." Because meanwhile, so many things have happened. What I mean is that I've had a difficult time with my parents, but today we've got a lot closer to each other. This has happened when they started to forgive me, what I have been doing to myself and what I did to others. Today I have another attitude toward this issue. My selfish way of thinking has gradually changed, and in this way, so much has been given back to me. My father fell seriously ill, and he has never been a believer. But a short while ago, he said to me, "I pray for you." So I looked at him in disbelief, because he actually always left the church backwards, before the church door had even been closed, and before the Mass had started. I thought that previously I would not have been able to understand this, but today it makes me unbelievably proud, and that's what counts. So I thought, we have achieved a great deal, and I think there is also a positive aspect around the topic of death, which over here is considered to be a tragic incident. It's for sure. Death also includes, but is not limited to, the process of grieving. Death also implies wonderful attributes, which I was allowed to experience. It's just a pity that it was only for such a short while. I would have liked to stay there for a longer period of time, and as I said before, death also bears characteristics which are wonderful. As for myself, what drives me is my mission and my aim to let somebody who wished to die go in peace when I am allowed to accompany him, letting him go, and in this way and by this means, many things including, I can create more peace. These are the problems which have to be solved in this context. This was the task which I was given and which I have understood. It was a message. It is by no means the case either that I came back all-knowing or knowing the answer to everything. On the contrary, you are even more confused than before. It's sure, I'm able to clarify some issues now, but then new questions arise that you will be dealing with, and I feel that this is a new path that I can follow, and that this is my way, which I have finally found. And in view of this, I find myself once again. Still at the very beginning, but I am allowed to pursue this way. I have found it, and I will pursue it. Michaela, thank you so very much for the interview. It's my pleasure.